Hello friends, in the first part of the Hurricane Milton video, we discussed all the visible data presented to us from its origin to the general public responses. But in this part, I will explore the possibility of why Hurricane Milton could be a man-made disaster. So let's get started with a simple and straightforward question. Does the US have the ability or technology to modify the weather? You might be surprised or not to learn that the answer is yes, a big yes. However, it is not as people imagine. The US cannot create a hurricane like Milton from scratch. Also, big countries like the US would never make such capabilities public, at least not until the right time. The US geo-engineering programs and curiosity in this field are not new. They started long ago, just a few years after World War II. Let's look at some experiments and programs performed by the US government to try to control the weather. Let's start with the most famous one, Operation Popeye. Operation Popeye was a secret US military program during the Vietnam War, running from 1967 to 1972. Its goal was to change the weather by creating more rain along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So friends, this operation was carried out from the bases in Thailand and targeted areas in Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam. It was reportedly supported by high-level officials of that time like Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and the CIA, even though Secretary of Defense at the time, Melvin Lloyd, denied that such weather modification program existed. However, in March 1971, reporter Jack Anderson wrote about Operation Popeye, calling it intermediate compatriot in his story. The name Operation Popeye became more widely known after it was briefly mentioned in the Pentagon Papers, a secret government report. It was also discussed in a New York Times article on July 3, 1972. Although the US lost the war and Operation Popeye didn't create a hurricane like Milton, just think about it. Even more than 50 years ago, the US hold the capabilities to manipulate weather. Now, many people might say that was a wartime scenario and circumstances were different. It was a battle of good versus evil. Even so, it doesn't change the fact that US government engaged in geo-engineering to manipulate the weather for their advantage. Well, if you still think creating and modifying storms and hurricanes is beyond US reach, let me introduce you to Project Cirrus, another piece of evidence. Project Cirrus was the first effort to change a hurricane. It involved the General Electric Corporation, the US Army Signal Corps, the Office of Naval Research, and the US Air Force. After initial doubts from scientists, they tried to modify a hurricane on October 13, 1947, targeting Hurricane Sable, which was moving out to sea. For Project Cirrus, two B-17 planes and a B-29 were sent from McDill Field in Florida to modify the hurricane. One B-17 flew near the hurricane and dropped about 180 pounds of crushed dry ice into the clouds. The crew noticed some changes in the clouds, but it was unclear if the seeding caused those changes. After the seeding, the hurricane changed direction and hit near Savannah, Georgia. People blamed the seeding for the shift, and a scientist named Edwin Langmuir, who won the Nobel Prize in 1932 for his work in surface chemistry, claimed human intervention caused the disaster. When a scientist of such status openly says that there was a human role in the disaster, it raises many questions. As a result, Project Cirrus was cancelled and there were threats of lawsuits. However, the fact that a similar storm in 1906 had also changed direction helped to avoid legal troubles. Ultimately, this event delayed hurricane seeding efforts for 11 years. But here's a twist. Initially, the government denied seeding the hurricane, and it took many years for them to admit it. According to 1965 article in the Fort Lauderdale News and Sun Sentinel, a hurricane in 1947 behaved unexpectedly. It wasn't until 12 years later that the government acknowledged the storm had been seeded. Friends, one thing to note, the information I'm sharing is not my theory. It's well published and publicly available data. Nothing here is fabricated. Various other experiments were conducted in the 1960s, 1970s and 1980s by the US government under the project name Storm Fury. Here scientists attempted to weaken the hurricanes by seeding them. The idea was to make hurricane bigger, which they thought would reduce their strength. However, they found that making storm larger could put more people at risk. This raised ethical concern about potentially harming those who wouldn't have been affected otherwise. In the end, the results were inconclusive and the project was stopped. Now some people might say this project aimed to counter storms and hurricanes, but they misses a key point. When a government conducts experiments, there are always people involved who assist them in both ways. Just as countries develop missiles and anti-missile systems, experiments are done both for and against natural phenomena. Just like COVID-19 was part of biological experiment, vaccines are also part of effort to counter the experiment, even though things went wrong. Now friends, let's move to recent allegations of weather manipulations against US companies and research institutes. Many conspiracy theories suggest that the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency (DARPA), responsible for developing emerging technologies for military use, is connected to the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program (HAARP), a research facility in Alaska that studies the ionosphere, the part of the atmosphere that helps with radio signals. HAARP was funded by the US Air Force and Navy to improve communication and surveillance. However, some believe that HAARP is actually a secret tool for manipulating weather, controlling storms, causing earthquakes, or altering the climate on a large scale. Some theories implicate DARPA as a key planner behind HAARP, suggesting that the agency used the project to develop military-grade weather control technologies. According to these claims, HAARP ionospheric experiment might have had hidden applications for triggering weather events like hurricanes, floods, or drought. Despite these claims, there is no scientific evidence linking DARPA to weather modification through HAARP, and the program was officially shut down in 2014. Friends, similarly with the Hurricane Milton, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, some conspiracy theories claim that US government of military had intentionally manipulated the storm path or allowed it to cause devastation for political or economic gains. These claims largely arose from mistrust of the government's handling of the disaster and the slow response to the crisis in New Orleans, rather than any concrete evidence of weather modification not found. While these allegations gain traction in certain circles, scientists universally reject the idea that Hurricane Katrina or any other hurricane can be controlled and manipulated with existing technology. Similarly, the Jason Advisory Group, a highly respected independent group of scientists advising the US government, had been linked to conspiracy theories. However, these allegations are speculative and lack supporting evidence. While the Jason Group's research spanned various topics including military technology, environmental issues, and nuclear deterrence, no proof connects them to weather modification program for strategic purposes. The recent flooding in Dubai also became the subject to conspiracy theories, with some attributing it to the uncontrolled cloud seeding. Cloud seeding, simply put, is a method to produce rain in arid areas. It's unclear whether human intervention caused the floods, but scientists attributed it to climate change and global warming. In an area that typically receives 140 to 200 mm of rain per year, that received a record 254 mm of rainfall in just 24 hours. It is like receiving more than a year worth of rain in just one day. So now, what's the conclusion? The information we have looked at is interesting but still uncertain. We have seen that the US have experimented with weather modification in projects like Operation Popeye and Project Cirrus. There is also new theories about HAARP and DARPA. However, there is no solid evidence that the US government has successfully controlled hurricanes like Milton. While we have some technology to change the weather, such as cloud seeding, only top government officials know whether technology exists for creating or controlling storms, and if so, to what extent. Claims that disasters like Hurricane Milton are man-made often stem from past events, distrust in the government, and random natural occurrences. Whether Milton was influenced by human actions or was simply natural disaster executed by climate change remains unclear. We may never find out unless the government shares information or someone leaks details about their secret projects. Additionally, if the US possesses advanced weather manipulation technology capable of creating hurricanes like Milton, it could have already employed these technologies against unfriendly nations like China, Russia, Iran, or Cuba, particularly those with coastlines or connection to the ocean. Similar to the flooding in Dubai, which some attribute to the human-made cloud seeding, Hurricane Milton could simply be another example of changing climate patterns on our planet. As we discussed in the first video on this topic, we explored how Hurricane Milton was formed. While these theories are intriguing, we must remember that without clear evidence, they remain unproven. unproven. In the end, nature power is undeniable. While we attempt to understand or even influence it, we remain subject to forces much greater than ourselves. Hurricane Milton, whether caused by natural processes or human actions, serve as reminder of how unpredictable and destructive our environment can be. Thank you.